Welcome back. We're on to our final interview. It is 12:34 and we will wrap up at approximately 1300. We're now going to be talking with communications and education specialist. That is you, Laurie Lake. And you, of course, are the specialist based at the Children's Institute, University of Cape Town. And you do play a central role in the annual publication of the South African Child Gauge. A very good afternoon to you. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here.
Okay, so for people like myself who's never heard about the South African Child Gauge, can you explain what's it all about and why is this seen as a very critical tool for understanding children's well-being in our country?
So, the South African Child Gauge is designed to measure progress for South Africa's children. In the same way as you would use a rain gauge to measure how much rain has fallen, what the Child Gauge does is it brings together researchers from across the country to better understand what is happening for children. And then we work really hard with that team of researchers to consider the implications for policy and practice. So, what can we do to strengthen services and support for children, as well as their families? And each year, the Child Gauge focuses on a different dimension of children's well-being. So over the past sort of 17 years, I think it is now, we've looked at things like education, health, nutrition, um, children's participation in decision making, um, access to social assistance and social services. And last year's issue focused attention on early childhood development.
So, Laurie, with due respect to you and the work that you're undertaking, despite these amazing initiatives, I mean, it just sounds so wonderful as you're explaining what the Child Gauge is all about. We're still we still have huge problems in the country regarding the well-being of children in the country, and that is, of course, due to a whole host of reasons. Um, Poverty, inequality, lack of access, um, not enough initiatives being driven by government to ensure childhood development and safety of children. And I'm sure your organization does, in partnership with other amazing organizations, you can only reach a certain amount of children, which also says that a lot of them fall by the wayside. Does that concern you?
So I think there's sort of two things that we need, sort of before we dive into the problems facing South Africa's children, and indeed there are manyfold problems that they are continuing to experience. It's also important for us just to recognize that we have made um, significant progress since 1994 in terms of children's access to water, to sanitation. We've seen decreases in child poverty linked to the rollout of the child support grant. So there has been progress. It's not that everything has been standing still or that everything is moving backwards. Um, but what we have seen at the same time is a deepening of inequalities in our country. So you're absolutely right. Um, Children continue to fall behind. They continue to fall through the cracks. And in a sense, that's what last year's gauge was looking at. So all the way back in 2015, we adopted the National Integrated Early Childhood Development Policy. And that provided a very clear vision of the kinds of supports and services that should be in place to enable all children to thrive. And that policy also aimed to prioritize those children who were most likely to be left behind. So what we did last year is we assessed progress. How far have we come in realizing that vision since 2015? So over that 10-year period. And some of these emerging findings, we were worried about what appears to be a slight uptick in child mortality. So we're looking at around 1 in 25 children dying before their 5th birthday. But of equal concern is what's happening for those that survive. So 71% of children in South Africa are living below the upper bound poverty line. And that means they're living in families that don't have sufficient resources to really meet their basic needs for food, for clothing, for shelter, for education, for transport, for electricity. And so you get a sense not only of children under pressure, but also families under pressure. And so it's not surprising that whilst we've seen a decline in child hunger over, say, the last 20 years, we've made no inroads whatsoever in terms of childhood stunting. And stunting is a sign of chronic malnutrition that leaves children short for age. Their physical growth is stunted. But it also stunts their developing brains, and that has implications for learning, for education, and their employment chances later in life. So what's happening for very young children really matters not only for the children of today, but for our future as a country.
Absolutely. I'm kind of wondering, in fact, you preempted my second question when you spoke about the stunting, because I was going to ask you, how does this impact on children that, are exposed? And of course, and you have this issue around stunting. Do those children then get any additional medical support or assistance, or is it too late for them really to catch up to their peers? How does that picture look? That's part one of my question. Then part two is, how has the 2 years of COVID, the lockdown, impacted further on the work you've done and the children that your organization and sister organizations are trying to assist in their early years of development?
They're big, complex questions. So I'm just sort of letting them sort of settle in as you're
Okay.
speaking. So if we're looking at something like child malnutrition, that has its roots even in utero. So we have quite high levels of low birth weight. So children who've not received sufficient nutrients whilst mom is pregnant. So if we're thinking about creating a support system to address the problem of stunting or the problem of malnutrition, we need to start really, really early on from conception. We need to be making sure that mums are accessing antenatal care as soon as possible. As soon as they recognize that they're pregnant, they should be attending clinics. And then at those clinic visits, they should be monitoring of the health and growth of both mom and baby. There have been calls from civil society and certainly interest from the Department of Social Development around the potential of introducing a maternity support grant that would help improve maternal nutrition during pregnancy. So that would be, one foundational aspect. We also know that raising a child in a poor household puts parents under incredible pressure. So there's also concerns around maternal mental health, and the ways in which these stresses can play out in terms of conflict and violence within the family. So again, social assistance, whether it's in the form of a maternal grant and or access to the child support is really important in giving families a source of regular income and some sense of security. Access to the CSG also enables children to access free education once they get to school age, as well as free healthcare services. So that's another important building block. But we know that the value of the CSG still sits way below what we call the food poverty line. So the food poverty line in South Africa at the moment is 796 Rand per person per month.
Sure.
And I can't remember what that equates to if you divide it by 30. But it's a very small amount of money per day. It means that families are having to make very difficult choices. So we're looking at roughly 4 in 10 of our children living in households below that food poverty line.
Okay, Laurie, sorry, we need to go for an ad break, but when we do come back, you can talk to us about the challenges during the lockdown. And in South Africa, we have, the childhood pregnancy, the teenage pregnancies, is that creating a bigger burden for organizations like yourself? Because these girls are children themselves and they're having babies. Do they have the support and the skills to bring up these babies as healthy little children or individuals? But please do respond right after the ad break. Stand by.
Thank you.
Investment and advisory services from an award-winning firm? Look no further than the Belmont Meyer Group, your gateway to unparalleled investment and wealth management. At Belmont Meyer, we believe in the art of wealth creation, a meticulous process fueled by our unwavering commitment to excellence. With a focus on providing elite alternative investments and quality advice, we also pride ourselves on maximizing value for our esteemed investors, as seen through our consistent outperformance. Your financial success is our top priority. Join us at Belmont Meyer and experience the difference firsthand. Ready to embark on a journey of greatness? Contact us today. Reach out to the Belmont Meyer Group on 078 786 1698. Call or WhatsApp or email us at info@belmontmeyer.com. Elevate your financial future with Belmont Meyer, where every detail matters.
Discover the Africa of your dreams and surround yourself with her spectacular beauty. Relax beneath her serene sunsets and explore wildlife at its natural best. It's where the pride of Africa comes together. The Kwantu Private Game Reserve. Get to know the Big Five or cruise on an elephant safari game drive. Interact with lion and tiger cubs and enjoy world-class halal cuisine while we pamper you during your 5-star stay. Indulge in the true African experience. For reservations, call now on 042-203-1400 or visit kwantu.co.za. The Kwantu Private Game Reserve, the place of gathering.
World-class financial services only at Sapphire Global, your financial partner. If you are looking for Islamic Sharia and ethical financial products, look no further. Sapphire Global offers a wide range of financial service offerings from short-term to life and investments. A full-service center with all financial requirements under one brand. Our highly skilled and experienced consultants are ready to help protect your financial future. Contact us on 041 001 0184 or visit our website on www.sapphireglobalfs.com. Sapphire Global is an authorized financial services provider.
Make a conscious choice. Sip for change and support Palestine Drinks Africa. With every can, you help end the genocide and stand in solidarity with Palestine. Choose between our original or sugar-free options available in a case of 24. Every sip is a step towards justice. Every purchase a powerful message of unity and support for the Palestinian cause. Contact 082 888 1440 or 082 7739 556 today and be part of the change. Palestine Drinks Africa. Sip for change. Liberty for everyone.
Rejuvenating media day by day. This is Salam Media.
Welcome back. Our guest is Laurie Lake. She's a communication and education specialist based at the Children's Institute, University of Cape Town, and we are talking, as I've indicated, the Children's Gauge. Laurie, how did you become involved in this initiative? And I know I've given you two questions to respond to after the ad break.
So I guess before working at the Children's Institute, I was involved working for a range of organizations, including the MRC, RAPCAN, who does work around violence prevention in children, the Early Learning Resource Unit, so developing education materials to support organizations working with and for children on the ground. So I guess that's the sort of experience and expertise that I brought with me to the Children's Institute. And then I've been working on the Child Gauge project for about 15 or more years now. Wow. So it's been an extraordinary privilege to be part of this process and really to be able to do this deep dive into the situation of children and to look at children from a slightly different perspective year on year. And as I said earlier on, to see progress certainly happening with some of the indicators and some of the domains of child well-being, and then some really serious sticking points where we really haven't made much progress at all. And then concerns, as you say, about the impact of COVID-19 on child well-being and the access to services.
What about teenage pregnancies or even preteen pregnancies, which we're seeing a lot of in our country? Does the Childhood Gauge, the Children's Gauge, actually monitor that at all, or is that outside the scope of your work?
Yeah, it falls outside the scope of my work, so I wouldn't want to talk to that as a sort of central area of expertise, other than perhaps just to note that we very often demonize teenage girls, and we hold them responsible for making what we see as bad decisions. And yet it's important to recognize that something like 30% of first sexual encounters in South Africa are often forced sexual encounters. So we need to be talking a lot more about how do we create a more enabling and supportive environment for adolescent girls. How do we make sure that they have access to information so that they know how to keep themselves safe, so that they're able to access contraception? And then absolutely there's a need for additional support if a young girl or any woman becomes pregnant. That's a time of heightened risk and pressure. And so it's been really gratifying to see the ways in which the Department of Basic Education has introduced and strengthened its policy on the prevention and management of teen pregnancy. so that those young mothers are able to continue with their education. Because that's absolutely essential in supporting their children's well-being moving forward.
How can ordinary citizens, educators, and of course community leaders make a meaningful contribution to improving the lives of children in their local areas? Because you have this children's gauge and childhood gauge, but you guys are really looking at the issues from a very macro level and going down to the micro level. That's when I guess all the implementation happens. So it rests on the shoulders of community members, does it not?
So if we were to take a look at last year's gauge, which was focusing on early childhood development, everything we know about the science of early learning is that that's rooted in the relationships that we build within the home and within the family with our young children. So you're wanting to see these 5 different elements of what we call nurturing care. We need to make sure our children have good health, that they have adequate nutrition, opportunities to learn, and then a safe and secure environment. But at the very heart of all of that is something called responsive caregiving. So that's a mother or a father or a grandmother or an aunt who is really tuned in to how their baby is feeling, and then responds proactively to address their child's needs. So if a baby is crying, the mother reaches out, she checks to see, is the baby hungry? Is the baby cold? Does the baby simply need to be held and comforted? And all of those actions, all of those examples of responsive care help to build trust, so that the child can then go out into the world with a sense of confidence. So that heart work really lies within the family, and building those healthy relationships is something that we can do with our own children. It's something that we can build as educators in the classroom. To have an adult who cares, who listens, and takes children seriously is in itself a very powerful foundation for realizing children's rights in practice.
Let's wrap up then and talk about NGO initiatives, how effective they are in addressing the challenges that we've talked about earlier on, and also what are some of the biggest misconceptions that the public has about childhood poverty or inequality in South Africa?
You keep throwing out these enormous questions. So I think maybe just to take us back to early childhood development, very often when we're talking about early childhood development in South Africa, the first thing that springs to mind is an ECD centre, a creche or a preschool. And what we know is that really it's only much older children, sort of 3 to 5 year olds, who are best placed to benefit from like a formal early learning program. And that in fact attendance and access to ECD programs is much lower amongst 0 to 2 year olds. And even if we're looking at 3 to 5 year olds, only 68% of them, so 2 out of 3 of those older children, are attending an ECD centre of some kind. And so very often as a country, we're focused on the ECD centres and we think that's the only place that learning takes place. And yet learning begins from the moment a child is born. A child is primed to focus in on the mother's face, to listen to her voice. She already recognizes that voice because she's heard it every day in utero. So the child's brain is almost like this enormous sponge that is soaking up all these experiences, what they see, what they hear, what they touch, And so it's really important that we honour and recognise the critical role that parents play and families play as the first teachers. And that a lot of that foundational learning happens even before a child gets anywhere near an ECD centre. So one of the key messages coming out of the 2024 South African Child Gauge is this message that we need to invest early, and early means really, really early, from conception, starting in pregnancy, creating as supportive and healthy an environment as possible for pregnant women, involving dads more proactively in the care of their children. And then obviously those investments need to continue through to early childhood development centres and formal schooling. But we need to build as strong and rounded and grounded a foundation as possible in the early years.
And would your role then end or stop once the kids go to school, per se, grade 1 or grade R, whatever it is? Is that where your role ends, and then other facilities or other facilitators would then come in and look at the continuation of the well-being of the children?
So at the Children's Institute, we are concerned about children from conception until they turn 18.
Oh, wow.
And we're not responsible for actual service delivery. So we work with NGOs and we work alongside government to really understand what are the challenges on the ground, what are the possibilities, what's working well, and then how can we start to, in a sense, take that to scale. So we're interested in the reach of programs, but also the quality of programs, whether that's health or education or nutrition.
So you're actually starting from the time of the child's birth, right up to the child leaving school, probably going to tertiary or the workplace or whatever. Are you seeing, in all the time that you've done this work, are you seeing positive results with the interventions like the early childhood development and other support systems that your organizations and other organizations have put in place?
So if one was to look at investments in early nutrition, healthcare, and early learning programs, we know that those offer huge returns, and they are of the greatest benefit for children living in more vulnerable households. What we haven't done in South Africa is really succeeded in implementing the National Integrated ECD policy. So there's a fantastic policy, there's very comprehensive, inclusive vision of what should be in place. But as Cyril Ramaphosa acknowledged, I think towards the end of last year or the beginning of this year, we didn't make the investment we needed to in the early years. 15 years ago. So there now is a much firmer commitment from government to prioritize the needs of young children, and we will indeed reap those rewards. And that's reaping the rewards for individual children and families, but more importantly for us as a society.
Yes, please, God, let that become a reality. My final question in closing, and I hope you're not going to say it's a curved ball that I'm throwing at you, but with the cutting down and cutting back regarding USAID and all of those foreign aid packages by the UN and USAID, is that going to have an impact on us here in South Africa in the work that you're doing?
It's certainly already having an impact on children's access, or children and adolescents' access to HIV services, in particular the kind of community outreach that is needed for meaningful counselling, and helping children understand their condition. It's also impacting on some of the associated services, counselling services that are provided through Thuthuzela care centres. So for children who've been the victims of violence. So we're certainly concerned about the cutbacks in terms of finance. We're concerned about the assault really on dignity, equality and inclusion programming more broadly, and the assault on human rights and what that might mean globally and here in South Africa. And then we also know that what tends to happen in a situation of crisis is that the needs of children tend to be left behind. So what we saw, for example, during COVID is we made a whole lot of decisions that were designed to protect our healthcare system and to protect adults who are most directly affected by COVID-19. But we didn't really think about the specific needs of children. We saw healthcare services, resources being diverted from child health to adult care. We stopped allowing caregivers to be with their children in hospital, despite knowing that having a caregiver present improves outcomes and helps children manage the stress and trauma of being hospitalized. We closed schools to devastating effect, and of course the ECD sector was
non-existent.
What was decimated, because you're looking
Absolutely.
at a very fragile system because it's not fully funded by government. We provide access to free education from grade R, but this really important foundational piece of learning isn't adequately resourced by government. That means ECD centres are reliant on fees, and during lockdown the whole system fell apart, and so there's a slow process of trying to rebuild both the sector and the lives of children.
And that's where we'll leave it. I'm so sorry to hear about the cutback on the funding by USAID and UN and other such organizations, because obviously the impact is going to be felt on your organization and other such organizations that are looking at the well-being of our little adults, our future leaders of the country. But that is where we have to leave it. Laurie Lake, lovely talking with you. Fascinating to hear the type of work you're involved in. It was wonderful hearing your insights. You, of course, are the communications and education specialist measuring childhood. Thank you so much. God bless and all the best.
Pleasure. Thank you.
It is 13:07. Of course, that means way over my wrap-up time. But thank you for staying with me on this very important discussion with Laurie Lake, communications and education specialist, talking about the South African child gauge. It's also fascinating to hear the different types of work being done in our country by NGOs, NPOs, and such organizations. And one does marvel at the dedication by, like these organizations and the people involved in them. But that's all we have time for now. Thank you for your company. Don't forget, you can join me next week, Monday morning at the same time, rather at 8 o'clock till 10 o'clock on the News and Views show. And then on a Tuesday from 11 to 1 on the mid-morning show. So till then, please keep warm, stay safe on the roads. Assalamu alaikum and Khuda Hafiz from me, Julie Ali.